Velshi, and there's a story unfolding right now in the American South that might not be at the top of your news feed, but I happen to think it's the most urgent problem facing every one of us today, no matter where in the country we live. The story you might even think you know because it started like so many second-term Trump emergencies, looking like a shameless power grab by a wannabe dictator facing the electoral consequences of his deeply unpopular regime. But two major developments in recent days have turned this cynical Trumpian scheme into a real-time deconstruction of our multiracial democracy. What we're witnessing as a result is the dawn of a new Jim Crow era, one that uses the same pernicious strategy of leveraging bad faith pretense and dirty tricks to rob American citizens of their voting rights or of the weight and value of their vote. The first part, the laying of the groundwork, you probably remember. Donald Trump was afraid of his party losing the midterms because his policies are so fantastically unpopular, so he set forth a plan, quite openly, of targeted gerrymandering to rig congressional district maps so that Republicans would pick up extra seats without picking up any extra votes. It began in Texas with a phone call from Donald Trump to Governor Abbott. Last August, Trump states his desires very plainly.
We have an opportunity in Texas to pick up 5 seats. We have a really good governor, and we have good people in Texas. And I won Texas. I got the highest vote in the history of Texas, as you probably know. And we are entitled to 5 more seats.
Entitled? It spreads state to state, anywhere with a Republican state house. One of the only GOP-led states to buck the request from Trump was Indiana, where a handful of state senators, Republican state senators, voted down the effort to change their state map. Trump was quick to target them for retribution. In fact, this past Tuesday, in the Republican primaries in Indiana, 6 of 8 Republican state senators who opposed Donald Trump's redistricting effort were voted out by the MAGA base. They were replaced by Trump-endorsed candidates. Now, across the country, some Democrats fought back. In California and Virginia, both states which believe that redistricting should be nonpartisan, Democrats organized referendums to allow voters, the ones who actually matter, the choice to adopt new maps as a sort of a counterbalance. So for a while, it was a fight. But then 2 rulings from 2 different courts changed everything. First, the U.S. Supreme Court effectively tore down the last real remaining pillar of the Voting Rights Act last week, erasing protections that were designed to preserve the voting power of black communities. That cleared the way for southern states to redraw districts in ways that will unquestionably dilute black voting rights, eliminate black majority districts, and roll back black representation in Congress. And they rushed to do exactly that. Louisiana, Tennessee, Mississippi, Alabama, and South Carolina all began the process for implementing new maps. On Thursday, Tennessee's governor signed into law a congressional map. It's hard to see that these 2 maps look the same. Look at the one on the left, look at the bottom left corner, the little blue thing, and look at the one on the right. This new congressional map eliminates the only majority black district in the entire state, which is the Democratic-held district surrounding Memphis. You can see how they did it on this map. They took the 9th congressional district, which included Memphis and its surrounding area, and split it into 3 different districts. In gerrymandering speak, that's what's known as cracking. You take a concentrated population of voters and you crack the block into separate districts, diluting the voting power of that group. Every eligible voter in Memphis will get to vote this November, but their vote will mean less by design. Yesterday, a legislative committee met in Louisiana to discuss a new map which would eliminate one of 2 majority black districts in that state. Louisiana is 1/3 black, and under the new map that erases a black majority district, the state will have 1/6 black majority congressional districts. Mind you, 40,000 people have already voted in the state's primary, which has now been suspended. Alabama Republicans are attempting to fast-track a new map targeting 2 predominantly black congressional districts. Over a quarter of Alabama's population is black. They may not have a single representative in Congress after this. They'll still get to cast a ballot this November, but their votes will mean less by design. Mississippi Republicans will convene for a special session on May the 20th to discuss new state Supreme Court maps. It took Florida Republicans no time to pass a new map which targeted 4 Democratic seats. South Carolina Republicans are trying to eliminate the state's lone Democratic seat held by Congressman Jim Clyburn. But the Republican State Senate, their leader there isn't fully convinced just yet. But if they do push forward, they will have to delay their state's primary. And then yesterday, the other shoe dropped. The Virginia Supreme Court ruled that the state's new map, the one that would have benefited Democrats, the one voted in by the citizens of Virginia a couple of weeks ago, is unconstitutional. The ruling was essentially procedural. The referendum to redistrict was a constitutional amendment, and Virginia has a strict process for enacting constitutional amendments. In a 4-3 split decision, judges found a flaw in how the referendum was brought to Virginia voters, and they threw it out, without regard for the fact that they voted. Virginia voters voted 2 weeks ago to approve the amendment, which is to say that the state Supreme Court in Virginia has invalidated 1.6 million votes. It's invalidated the clear preference for Democratic governance in Virginia that Virginia voters have voted for loud and clear since last November. You may be wondering how in a functioning democracy we can land in such a place, where Louisiana's governor can suspend an election to push through a new map. And in Tennessee, it takes 4 business days to disenfranchise 1 million black voters. Florida and Mississippi and Alabama pushing through new maps, but Virginia can hold a whole election to decide on a new map by popular vote, and the will of the people gets tossed out by the courts. This is a flashing red warning light that we are slipping out of being a functional democracy right now in real time. A patchwork legal system for drawing congressional maps means some states, like California, have nonpartisan redistricting commissions. Virginia is also bipartisan. And other states leave it up to their legislature. In Alabama, Mississippi, Tennessee, Republicans hold veto-proof majorities in the state legislature, which doesn't matter because the governor's a Republican anyway. They wouldn't veto it. But this means fewer legal hurdles to jump. In Florida's case, they just ignored their state constitution entirely. Back in 2010, Florida voters passed an anti-gerrymandering amendment. Florida's new map is being challenged on that basis, but the Florida Supreme Court is packed with Ron DeSantis allies, so again, it's not going to matter. Let's be clear, this system diminishes the power of everyone's vote. You may not live in Louisiana or Tennessee or Alabama or Mississippi, but if we are living in a system where everyone's vote doesn't carry the same weight, it means your vote is diluted too. Doesn't matter how hard you vote Democrat in California or New York if the system is rigged in half a dozen southern states. That is where democracy is defeated. In the abstractions, in the corrupting little power grabs and screams. Democracy is not defeated because somebody stands up and says, democracy ends on Tuesday. It's defeated in the dozens or hundreds of smaller malevolent moves against it. And right now, this is the most important one. And look, Democrats were always the underdogs in this fight. Their approach to mid-decade redistricting was retaliatory. Democratic-led redistricting has been framed as a necessary offset to Trump's push in Republican-led states. The disenfranchisement of black voters we're seeing now is the culmination of a larger political project to marginalize minorities, and it's going to take more than a few extra seats in California to fight it back. What this country needs to start thinking about is a new reconstruction. Nonpartisan, nationwide redistricting, campaign finance restrictions, easier elections, or at least elections that are easier to vote in, and a fair and just Supreme Court. The response to measured autocracy cannot be improvised. It cannot be improvised retaliation. Let me tell you about the states that have already enacted new maps and the party which stands to benefit from each. In Texas, Republicans could gain 5 seats, 1 seat in North Carolina, 1 or 2 in Ohio, 3 or 4 in Florida, 1 in Tennessee. Democrats, on the other hand, could gain 5 seats in California, 1 in Utah. Louisiana could add yet 1 more in the Republican column. But even these gains, I just want to be fair, are presumptive. Voters haven't voted yet. Nothing is certain. What's left of American democracy is, in fact, up to you, up to voters, defying the expectations of people who seek predetermined outcomes to elections, who seek to choose their voters rather than to let their voters choose them. Joining me now is Elie Mystal, justice correspondent and columnist for The Nation. He's an Alfred Nobler Fellow at the Type Media Center and author of multiple books, including Bad Law, 10 Popular Laws That Are Ruining America. Elie, good morning to you. Thank you for being with us. I'm trying not to overstate this. I'm trying not to have viewers look at me and say, dude, why is your hair on fire? This is crazy. It's really not. This is a pernicious, across-the-board attack on democracy.
And an attack on black people specifically. A lot of times when I've seen this story framed over the last few weeks, it has been framed as a Democrat versus Republican issue, as a battle for the soul of the House of Representatives. It is not. It is an attack by white people against the very concept of black representation. This is Jim Crow 2.0. And I don't mean that in a kind of hyperbolic way. Yeah. I mean that on a ground level, like what are they actually trying to do?
So let me interrupt you there, because I think this is really important. Jim Crow was not one thing, right? Slavery was not one thing. It was a series. It was hundreds of little things that curtailed people's freedoms, and that's what's happening. That from 1965 onwards, we've fixed a lot of little things, and this administration's taking one thing down at a time.
If you lived in the Jim Crow South as a black person, you could vote as long as you could guess the number of jelly beans. You could vote as long as you could figure out what day, what time. If it, like the way that people are disenfranchised is not saying, darky, you can't vote here. It's all of these little procedural issues that frustrate and suppress the ability of black people to vote, or the ability of those votes to matter. And that's what the Supreme Court has approved. That's what the white supremacist decision in Louisiana versus Calais approved, this reconstruction of the Jim Crow South, right? And so when we talk about this issue, when we talk about what what Democrats need to do, it's not just what Democrats need to do, it's what Americans need to do.
Right.
Whether or not Americans want to live in this reconstituted apartheid state. And unfortunately, what I see is most Americans willing to go along with it. When you look at how they are redistricting the maps in Louisiana or Tennessee, please note, they are not messing with white Democratic enclaves in those states. There are white Democrats in Tennessee. There are white Democrats in Louisiana. I happen to be friends with one of them, right? Her neighborhood, their neighborhoods, they're being left alone. The neighborhoods that are being taken away are the black neighborhoods, the ones in Memphis, like you showed in your opening. It's the black neighborhoods that are being split up and cracked. And so what they're trying to do is eliminate the Congressional Black Caucus. The Congressional Black Caucus has 67 members. Most of them represent the South, and those seats are the ones being targeted, being taken away. What do we do about it? I don't know, Allie. The last time we had a decision like this, the historical precedent for Louisiana versus Calais in 2026 is Plessy v. Ferguson in 1896. That is in terms of the racism that the Supreme Court has ushered in, that's your case, right? And when you look at Plessy v. Ferguson in 1896, what did it take to overcome that? And it took decades, generations of black people lived and died under Plessy v. Ferguson before 1954, when it was overturned-ish by Brown v. Board of Ed, and 1964 and 1965, when it was overturned legislatively by the Civil Rights Act and the now defunct Voting Rights Act of 1955. So that's the timeline we're looking at. When white people get it in their head that they are allowed, that they are, to use Trump's words, entitled to be this racist, that's the kind of generational long timeline we're talking about. And the way to overcome that is for establishment Democrats and the leaders of this country to take judicial reform seriously. That is the only way. What changed between 1896 and 1954? You had a different Supreme Court. And as long as you allow this conservative supermajority, this racist, this now provably racist conservative supermajority on the Supreme Court, as long as you allow them to hold power, nothing happens. Nothing changes. This is what they want. This is what they have the power to do. And until you take judicial reform seriously at all levels, then you lose at all levels. Democrats, look what happened in Virginia, which you brought up, right? Judicial reform at all levels. You had a 7-judge panel, 4-3, overturning a voter referendum of the people in Virginia. That court needs to be reformed, and the way that Virginia picks its state Supreme Court is wacky, just to be sure. So until Democrats can speak with one unified voice that we are going to reform this judicial system, Democrats will continue to lose at every
what's
level,
the argument?
and black people will continue to lose.
I'm going to be talking to Hakeem Jeffries in a minute, and we can talk about what Congress needs to do. But what's the message to Americans who don't feel affected by this? I'm not in Tennessee, I'm not in Mississippi, I'm not in Alabama, I'm not in Louisiana. What's the way you motivate people to say, this is actually your democracy coming apart? This is not, it's targeting black people, but it's once again, once you put one of us in chains, we're all in chains.
Right. I mean, look, you can go to white South Africans who were living in Cape Town in 1975, and they were like, "I'm not on Robben Island. What does this have to do with me?" Right? Like that's your mentality there. If you are okay living in an apartheid country, then it doesn't have anything to do with you. I happen to believe that when one of us isn't free, all of us aren't free. And I happen to believe that the way that you stop Republican racism, the way that you stop these white supremacist decisions, is to reject them, is to put country over party, to put morality over party, and to reject the Republican agenda. But we see time and time again, white Americans won't do that. The Democratic candidate for president has not carried the white vote since the passage of the 1964 Civil Rights Act. That's not a phase. White people aren't going through a phase right now. They have decided since 1964 that the promise of a multi-ethnic, multiracial democracy based on fairness and justice is not a project they want to be in. And so the only way that we've had progress is by a coalition of black people, Latino people, Asian people, and the few whites of good conscience that they are to build a rising majority. That's the only way it's happened. And as we're seeing now with these new rules, unless white people get over themselves, unless they reverse themselves and their ancestors and their voting habits since the passage of the 1964 Civil Rights Act, they will get exactly the racist country that they have long desired. So at some level, it's not even... Chris Rock has a great joke, right? Like, racism isn't a black problem, it's a white person's problem.
Right.
Like, y'all are the ones with the sickness, not me. Like, until white people heal thyself, this is going to continue happening again.
I encourage people to read your writings this week. You were talking about how you have to tell your kids that they're going to have less in terms of democratic privilege than you do, which is saying something. Ellie, thanks a million for being here. Ellie Mistel is the justice correspondent for The Call and columnist for The Nation. Is the author of multiple important books, including Bad Law. All right, up next, I'll continue this conversation with House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries, who says the Democrats' fight on this is just beginning. More Velshi after the break.